Hello and welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato, and today we're going to be talking about the ongoing war, the Gaza genocide going on in the Middle East, and what is happening in terms of the actual military conflict. So I know I make a lot of videos on the propaganda war going on, but now we're going to look at what is happening military to military. And so to start off with, we have Israel here, who is admitting that their helicopters fired on their own civilians running from the Supernova Music Festival on October 7th. And it says here the pilots realized that there was tremendous difficulty in distinguishing within the occupied outposts and settlements who was a terrorist and who was a soldier or civilian. The rate of fire against the thousands of terrorists was tremendous at first, and only at a certain point did the pilots begin to slow down the attack and carefully select their targets. So yeah, there is increasing evidence that very few civilians actually died during the October 7th Hamas attack, and of those civilians that died, all that can be verified so far have died either in crossfire, because there were people with weapons amongst those civilians, or they have died due to the Israelis directly attacking them. So we have that, and we also have a video here saying that America is getting directly involved. And so this is in another language, so we're not going to directly watch it, but there is this Palestinian man who is saying that the soldier who forced him and his family to flee their home had an American flag on his uniform. So this should be very concerning to people, because America supposedly only has advisors in there helping to free the hostages, but you can stretch the definition of how you free the hostages quite a bit to include directly intervening in Gaza if you really wanted to. And it seems like there's increasing evidence that that is actually the case. Here we have Low-Key, the Twitter account, talking about how Palestinian survivors from Al-Nasser neighborhood in Gaza have reported seeing U.S. soldiers on the ground with the Israeli occupation forces. So again, these are unconfirmed reports, but there is some evidence that the Americans are getting involved in the conflict. And remember the repercussions from America, both financially and militarily supporting the Israelis, means that makes America a legitimate target for retaliation by the forces, the anti-Zionist forces. And so we have a post here talking about how American special forces suffered the first defeat in the Middle East and how there are people missing in action. Former Pentagon advisor Douglas Macgregor, who I recommend you go watch his channel and go watch his interviews, he's very intelligent, spoke about the termination of U.S. special forces during a rescue operation. So apparently Americans have tried to go in and get the hostages, and they were unsuccessful and died in the result of that. So this goes on to say, in addition, he claims that everyone who was involved in it was destroyed. There have been reports of the first casualties among the U.S. military in the Middle East. Elite U.S. special forces were supposed to rescue hostages held by the Palestinian rebels, but the mission failed, and all the special forces were killed. This was announced by former Pentagon advisor Colonel Douglas Macgregor. When describing what happened, he used the phrase cut to pieces. Macgregor's military connections lend weight to his claims. So right now, the American military does not want to say that anyone outright died in this conflict, because that would make them feel more directly involved, and that would make the population of America feel more directly involved. And so now they're just saying that there were injuries, but no one died. But Douglas Macgregor's sources, Colonel Douglas Macgregor's sources, are saying that people actually died in the conflict so far. And there are dozens of terrorists, or there are dozens of attacks on American bases by people, by groups that America considers to be terrorist, but Syria would consider them to be freedom fighters. Palestine would consider them to be freedom fighters. And when you consider some of these bases are in Syria, where the United States is not supposed to be in Syria, they're not legally allowed to be there. United Nations did not give them permission. The Syrian government did not give them permission. They are attacking freedom fighters who are trying to get an occupying force off of their territory. And the same with Iraq, where Iraq, their government voted to have American bases removed, and Americans came back to them and said, if you remove our bases, we steal your money. So America has made it very clear that they're an occupying force, and they are taking casualties because of it. So the article goes on to say, to make matters worse, the Pentagon only reluctantly acknowledged the casualties in the Middle East a few days ago. Arab rebels have become more daring at this point and are attacking U.S. military bases using drones and homemade missiles. Pentagon said 24 soldiers were killed at one base and a civilian contractor suffered non-life-threatening injuries. Okay, so yeah, America is losing quite a few people now. And we can see that Israel is also losing people and equipment as well. And America has really run out of equipment to provide to Israel because they've provided so much equipment to Ukraine already. And so here we have this picture showing a large number of damaged and destroyed Israeli tanks, armored vehicles, and bulldozers near Al-Shifa Hospital, northwest Gaza. And so you might be saying, well, how legitimate is this? Can we trust this information? Well, we have satellite images from Al Jazeera showing that the number of vehicles in northwest Gaza decreased on November 8th to 295 after it was 383 on November 3rd. Hamas destroyed 88 armored vehicles in 5 days. And so they're using satellite footage because there's no other vehicles in northern Gaza at this point. Everyone else had fled. They're using satellite image to show how many vehicles were actually wiped out during this operation, or were at the very least damaged enough that they were sent back to Israel for repairs. And so right now the number is at 88 armored vehicles, which I think is pretty impressive. And this does support what I've said in other videos, which is that tanks are really just not as important in modern warfare as they used to be. And that's because of the fact that there's such a proliferation of anti-tank weaponry that tanks become, sure, they're a good method of transportation for people if they're highly mobile, but they also become inconvenient whenever you have, say, like this person here. I've seen this video where he just kind of can run up to the side and plant an explosive and destroy the tank. And so it's become obvious that tank warfare is not as influential as it used to be in wars of the 1900s. In modern wars, what is helpful are things like artillery, anti-aircraft, drones, aircraft themselves. I mean, those are the things that really decide the battlefield. Whereas tanks and even a lot of things like hypersonic missiles are another one. I mean, United States is putting, I was going to say, even things like aircraft carriers are not as important because you can have an aircraft carrier and then Russia or China uses a hypersonic missile and they just destroy the entire aircraft carrier and you lose all of that equipment. So you have to consider these things when designing your equipment nowadays because there are so many cheap options for equipment that you could produce a lot of, such as drones that are very important for the battlefield. And so now we have this last post that we'll be going over. Unprecedented levels of escalation are going on in Syria. The attacks on the American military bases east of Deir ez-Zor last night were apparently conducted directly by the Syrian army. Okay, so Syrian army has a legitimate right to attack American bases here because American bases are a foreign occupying force on their soil, and under international law, they are absolutely allowed to attack these American bases. And so this post is saying that the Syrian army has attacked the bases. So about 15 missiles were launched by the Syrian army directly targeting the illegal U.S. base that's been stealing oil for years. Yeah, I don't understand how they could consider that to be legitimate, stealing oil from Syria. I don't understand what potential purpose it serves, how they can justify that. No one really tries to justify that. When former President Donald Trump was asked about this, he literally just said they were in Syria to steal the oil. So just shocking that Americans are being roped into this situation, most of them pretty unwillingly because they want a ceasefire. They don't want the situation to continue. A lot of them are isolationists and don't want to get involved in the Middle East at all. They just want to trade for oil, which I think is a perfectly reasonable mentality to have. But that is the current situation in terms of the war situation in Israel and Palestine. If you found this video to be helpful, to be informative, please give us a thumbs up. It helps us in the algorithm. Please subscribe to our channel for more content, YouTube and Rumble. Please leave us a comment in the comment box below, questions, concerns, critiques you might have. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.